Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures and the sermon for the previous Sunday. And this video is from looking back on Sunday, May 7th. The scriptures for the day were Acts chapter 7, verses 55 through 60, Psalm 31, verses 1 through 5 and 15 to 16, 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 2 to 10, and the gospel was John chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. I focused my sermon on the gospel, which contained the very well-known verse, which was verse 6, John 14:6. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I talked a little bit about how that verse was never, in that context, wouldn't make much sense for it to be a exclusionary kind of verse where Jesus is saying, if you don't believe in me, I am the way and the truth and the life, and if you don't believe in me, you won't go to heaven. Jesus isn't really concerned about heaven in that particular moment to start with. He's trying to convey all that his disciples need to hear to gain understanding of what might be happening as Jesus faces being arrested and crucified, and also has assurance that Jesus is always with them, even after he dies, even after he ascends to heaven. And so Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Is basically his point is he is the way for people to know, for humanity to know God, because Jesus is the Word made flesh from the beginning of John's Gospel. So Jesus reveals to humanity what God is like and who God is. So, but I want to take it a step further and think not just about the fact that Jesus reveals to us who God is. Jesus is the way of knowing what God is like and who God is. Jesus is the truth, being the one who embodied God's love for the world, and the life, the one who shows us what abundant life, that God is the source of abundant life for us, our relationship with God. But also that we think about this as being witnesses to this reality, Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. And I caught an interesting example of this happening in the first reading from Acts. Now, the Acts reading told the story of Stephen, who is, we commemorate as a martyr in December, but it tells a story about Stephen being stoned. And the reason he is stoned is because he is testifying to the risen Christ, and the authorities of that particular time were arresting people for doing that. And so Stephen was stoned to death for his faith. But what he says is, as he's being stoned, he makes the statement for God to forgive them of what they are doing. And this is one example of testifying to Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. Because Jesus taught his disciples. A couple weeks ago, we had the passage where Jesus, the risen Christ, appears to his disciples and says, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. And talks about sharing forgiveness and being agents of forgiveness. And Stephen does the same thing in his dying moments, speaks of forgiveness and asks for God to forgive those who were basically taking his life. And so it's not just knowing that Jesus is the resurrection, it's a different verse. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. It's just a little bit later in John. Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. That is, it's more than just knowing that. It's just as Jesus embodied God's way and God's truth and the abundant life that God has for humanity. So then, as followers of Jesus and witnesses to Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life, there's an element of living out that way, that truth. And the living this way is another way that we experience the abundant life that God intends. So one of our missions is to be people who can remind others of God's presence with us, God's presence with them, to find opportunities to witness, testify to where we see God's presence with us, with others. And then also reminding others, reminding the world of God's love for the world. That's kind of, I think these are two very important jobs of us as the church, reminding the world of that God loves the world, and also living as witnesses to remind people that God is present and show how God is present. Sometimes that might be through what we do, which is why churches do, part of the reason why churches do ministries is to be that, it's to be a reminder to the world that God is present and active, and God is working through God's church, God's people, to feed the hungry, to give a voice to the voiceless, to bring healing and reconciliation and relationship between broken groups of people who have broken relationship, to pray for the people or situations that need prayer in our lives or in the world, to give support to those who are feeling lost or disconnected or uncertain. But so yesterday in my sermon, I kind of talked about the fact that Jesus' words here were conveying that Jesus reveals God to the world in human form. And so the disciples' questions about the location, that's what I talked about, location. The location of Jesus, the location of God, that Jesus is saying, when I'm here, God is here. So if you've seen me, if you've seen me, then you've seen the Father, because I am the one who reveals God the Father to the world. But now let's take that a step further and say, as witnesses to the fact that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, we then live out that way, that truth. And we recognize this as the way of experiencing abundant life. God's ways are the ways to experience eternal, abundant life in our midst. Sharing God's love, witnessing to the fact that God is active in the world around us, and being able to say where we see God active, and being able to live out the love of God by caring about those around us, by caring about the community around our churches, being good neighbors to the community that our churches are in, being good neighbors where we live. There's obviously a variety of different things. And also, of course, being agents for forgiveness and reconciliation. Just like as Stephen talked about forgiveness in his dying moments. So those are some thoughts about the impact of the way, the truth, and the life in our life of faith, and being witnesses to Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. It doesn't mean going out and telling people if they don't believe in Jesus, they're not going to go to heaven, which is the traditional interpretation of that verse. It's about being able to see God active in the world around us, because Jesus came to reveal God, to say that God is here in the world around us, to live out loving service in the world around us, because God so loved the world. And that these ways of living are the ways of abundant life that Jesus came to reveal to us. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about the sermon, about this video, about the scriptures in general that we had this past weekend. So you're welcome to share them in the comments, either on YouTube or on Facebook. And thanks for watching. God bless.